In 2021, Hasbro released the final chapter of their Transformers Generations War for Cybertron trilogy. Concurrently, they also introduced a new series of figures in their Studio Series line based on the 1986 film, aptly named Studio Series 86. Come on, I sure hope that wasn't a surprise. And for a time, these two themes worked together in harmony, being basically two sides of the same coin. Hell, that first wave of SS86 figures was very obviously just carryover from WFC, with only half of the film's main cast being part of 86, while the other half remained behind in Generations. Both lines had notably similar engineering and perfectly matching aesthetics, making it clear that they were supposed to fit together. But then came a shift. It started small. A few Generations toys got re-released in Studio Series with more cartoon-accurate color palettes, but gradually they began to make entirely new toys of characters that had just been in the Generations line. SS86 evolved to focus much more on screen accuracy and less on compatibility with anything Generations was doing, which led to a lot of repeat toys across both lines with wildly different approaches. It's been a controversial change, and one I really want to dive into. I want to figure out exactly why these lines have become so different in the first place, and moreover, which of these takes is better. And to do that, I think we need to start at the beginning, with the very first character to receive a completely redone mold in SS86. So today, we're going to be comparing Transformers Generations War for Cybertron Earthrise Deluxe Class WFC-E31 Ironhide and Transformers Studio Series 86, the Transformers the Movie Voyager Class SS86-17 Ironhide. I love Ironhide. He's such a great character in any incarnation. I love that tired tough guy thing they always do with him. He's always a blast to see in a fight, and honestly, I think he has one of the strongest personalities of any of the Autobots from that original G1 cartoon. And maybe it's that personality that makes me love the Earthrise figure's robot mode so much. To me, this just screams Ironhide. The bulky proportions do an amazing job of conveying that this is an old soldier, a weapons expert, friggin' Optimus Prime's bodyguard. Everything about this feels commanding. His forearms taper out to add some extra bulk, those massive cinder blocks for shins make him feel really sturdy, the broad shoulders with those top ridges gives him some good heft, and even the way his chest almost puffs out makes him seem even tougher. I also appreciate the attempt to better incorporate his alt mode into the design. For context, the original G1 toy was like 1/3 of a van, with the rest kind of just popping off to make a battle station. There's so little of the actual van left in robot mode that when Sunbow had to translate it to an animation model, they kinda just slapped the windshield onto the most generic, boxy robot design possible and called it a day. But here, instead of just being the windshield, his torso now also pretty heavily features the front grille and headlights from his van mode. They've also tried to make the side paneling of the van much more visible in his legs, giving you a better sense of where everything goes in transformation that all the best Transformers designs have. Even the way the bumper helps give his torso more bulk makes it clear that the intent was to try and use his alt mode to help with characterizing the figure, which I love. And all that's to say nothing of that gorgeous sculpt work. I love when the designers cram these things full of tiny, intricate greebling and mechanical detailing. All those panel lines and pistons and vents do an incredible job of giving this thing a real sense of scale, and they make him feel like a living, functioning machine made out of a million moving pieces. Put simply, they cooked. That head sculpt rules too. The aggressive, angular mohawk feels right at home on this figure, and the sculpting in the face does so much to bring him to life. It's a haggard old scowl that tells you he means business, but without looking cruel. Of course, it's not all perfect with this thing. That single panel his head rests on isn't exactly the cleanest look, and turning him around reveals just how gappy he really is in the back and arms. It's one of those things that just kind of comes with the territory with Transformers figures. They've got a limited part count that mostly goes into transformation, and filling those voids is a lot harder to do with flash injection molding, but I'd have appreciated something to make him a little less egregious. I don't know, maybe I'm just spoiled by how well Spinister hit him. The colors are another area where things get a bit muddy. On the one hand, the intention behind him is great. The original cartoon design was mostly red, gray, and darker gray. So the Earthrise figure decided to ditch the dark gray and introduce some more black, and I do think it looks amazing, adding a ton more hard edge contrast to the color palette. I also like that they're not trying to hide the van mode's yellow stripe. Instead, they used it as a minor accent on the torso and legs, and it really pops. But as you may have noticed, this thing has some consistency issues. Because of how these things are designed, they actually cast everything in a number of different types of plastic to serve different purposes, like being see-through, being more structural, or being flexible enough to accommodate transformation clearances. The issue is that these plastics and paints were not properly color matched, leading the poor guy to look like a hodgepodge of different reds. From a distance, it's not that noticeable, but it does start to fall apart under any scrutiny. This, along with the gappy back, make the thing feel a touch cheaper than it otherwise would have, but but even still, I love the look of this robot mode overall. In comparison, 86 Ironhide trades style and personality for cohesion and consistency. Right out the gate, this is one of the biggest contrasts between generations and studio series, a core difference in design philosophy and one of the main reasons so many characters have been redone across the two lines. Generations is going for modernity. It wants to recapture the spirit of those original designs, but moreover, the spirit of the characters that those designs embody. They also clearly want to put a much heavier emphasis on detail. They want these things to look like giant, quote-unquote, practical machines without pushing things into Bayverse territory. Studio Series, on the other hand, is a line entirely built around the idea of perfectly capturing the character designs as they appeared in different movies. It's a philosophy that worked perfectly fine for the live-action films, since those designs were originally made to work in a 3D space, but for something based on the G1 cartoon, well... Look, I love those original designs a lot. I do, honest. At their best, their sheer dynamism can make them look amazing, and they're simple enough to act as a truly uncontested springboard for more modern designs to iterate on, but they're also very clearly designed to be easy to draw a million times by underpaid and overworked animators. And this was a time before heavy stylization was the norm with cartoons, meaning that a lot of the time they lack the same flair as something like animated. And then you have to take into account that this cartoon was made for much smaller TVs with far worse resolution, so they literally couldn't add too much detail without it being lost anyways. They're extremely simple by design, which for the time in the medium is completely fine. But trying to translate them one-to-one into three-dimensional objects you can play with, frankly, kind of makes them look boring. The lack of detail betrays its true nature, not as a depiction of a giant transforming robot or as an adaptation of a living character made of complex machinery, but as a miniature plastic adaptation of a cartoon not meant to be seen this way. And that's especially true for Ironhide, who, again, barely has a visible alt mode and mostly winds up looking like an assembly of smooth boxes. All this means that Studio Series Ironhide is, lagging behind his Earthrise brother, the looks department. That smooth animation cell style does look incredibly screen accurate, but holds back the personality and scale of the figure a lot. To their credit, they tried to at least sort of bridge the gap between generations in G1. They've added some additional panel lining and subtle raised edges to most of the larger smooth surfaces, but it's clearly designed to be invisible from further away to appeal that ever-important G1 accuracy. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I sure hope I've made it clear there are times when I love the more screen accurate approach, but we'll get more into why this specific instance doesn't work so well in a bit. And unfortunately, that's not the only issue with how this thing looks. The proportions are funky, to say the least. The biceps, waist, and thighs are all weirdly lanky and narrow, but the forearms and shins are just as thick as the Earthrise guys, making him come across a bit off. It's certainly not helped by those shoulders, which look fine on their own, but they're attached to these transformation panels that make them stick out way too far in comparison to the rest of his proportions. They've also rounded out the windshield chest, which isn't that much of an issue, but it does make him look a little less tough than the Earthrise figure. The proportions aren't terrible by any means, but for Ironhide specifically, I feel like they come across a bit lanky given his characterization. They do work a lot better for Ratchet, though. And of course, there's the head. For a start, it's actually slightly larger than the Earthrise one, which makes the rest of the body feel a bit smaller in comparison. Not a huge issue, but worth pointing out. But the real concern is that face sculpt. Look, I don't know what causes it exactly, but the Studio Series team seems to have some sort of trouble sculpting these smoother G1-inspired faces. Some of them turn out okay, but for every Hot Rod, there's a Blur, Bumblebee. Hell, they still have this issue with the recent Megatron. And here is no different. The expression being so generic and boring already isn't great, but the way his upper lip puffs out makes him look downright silly. The one area where this thing does excel is the colors. That red is much more vibrant and lively than any of the shades used for Earthrise, and it's amazing just how consistent it is. Like, the paint matching on the windshield isn't perfect, but it's still much closer overall, and while I certainly prefer the higher contrast that Earthrise's black provided, the gray used here is spot on to the cartoon. My only real gripe is that I wish the hands and shoulders hadn't been painted gray and had instead just been cast on the same sprue as the waist and abs. I'm sure there was some practical reason that kept them from doing that. Flash molding is far from my area of expertise, but as is, I'm kinda nervous that they'll eventually start chipping pretty badly, especially those hands. For now, they seem mostly fine though, save for this nick on his right knuckle. I waited until we'd covered both figures to do this, but for a size comparison, here they both are next to Tahumata, Marvel Legends Death's Head, Earthrise Optimus, Netflix Bumblebee, Earthrise Wheeljack, Animated Blur, Legacy Gears, Earthrise Sunstreaker, and Marvel Legends Extremis Iron Man, literally just because iron. 86 Ironhide is just a tiny bit smaller, but both of them scaled really well with most other Transformers figures. What it really comes down to is style. The bulkier proportions and heavier greebling make Earthrise Ironhide feel much more at home with other generations figures than its SS86 counterpart, because, you know, they're literally part of the same line. And that's honestly the biggest issue I have with this smoother, screen-accurate approach. Yeah, I think the smoother style is a little less interesting, and in Ironhide's case particularly, it looks worse, but there's nothing wrong with trying to look like the thing you're recreating. But the reality is that it just doesn't fit in with the rest of the Generations lineup they've been putting out for the last 7 years. The new priorities SS86 has means this thing kind of only goes well with other figures from the same line with the same design philosophy, of which there are far fewer characters than in Generations. For me, all this puts 86 squarely below Earthrise in terms of visuals, but there's more to a bot than how it looks, so can he catch up in posability? Starting with Earthrise, he has a ball joint at the head, which allows for full rotation and no up, down, or tilt, but you can cheese him looking down by untabbing this transformation hinge. Full rotation at the shoulder, which is on 2 separate hinges that allow his arm to move up way more than the average Transformers figure, bicep swivel just past 90 at the elbow, and a wrist swivel. Moving back up to that transformation hinge, if you untab it again, you can get a bit of side-to-side torso rotation, but for slightly more legal articulation, he also has a waist swivel. Legs can kick up, back, and out super far, there's a thigh swivel, knee can bend just over 90 degrees, and he has an absurdly deep ankle tilt. In comparison, the 86 figure also has a ball joint at the head, allowing for full rotation, but does allow for the slightest amount of tilt, and this hinge at the neck allows for him to look down and up without having to untab anything. Full rotation at the shoulder, arm can move out well, but not quite as far as Earthrise, though I do love the extra sculpting to fill in the gaps when he does this. Bicep swivel, 90 degrees at the elbow, and a wrist swivel. If we're counting cheesed articulation, you can untab the upper torso to have him crunch backwards, though it doesn't look great, and a waist swivel right below it. The legs are a weird customer, because with Generations, they'd sort of figured out the whole legs moving past the hip skirt thing by just having the hips built into the legs. But here they took a different approach entirely and chose to just have it be this single solid slab getting in the way. It basically means that if you want to lift either leg up, the whole piece has to come with it, which really doesn't look great. It's clear that the whole hip assembly gets in the way a bit too, because while up, down, and out are good, they don't have nearly as much range as Earthrise got. Thigh swivel just past 90 at the knee, and the ankles are where things get impressive. His foot can bend up and down for transformation, allowing you to get some crazy dynamic posing compared to the static feet of Earthrise. And to top it all off, you get a decent ankle pivot, but again, not as much range as the other guy. The 86 figure definitely has some improvements over Earthrise, especially those neck and feet hinges, but for the most part, Earthrise pretty consistently has more range. Honestly, it's just about balanced for me. I certainly think you can't go wrong with either of these guys. Of course, by now you've probably noticed a certain bias I seem to have. I've been hyping up the Earthrise figure a lot, haven't I? I've been waxing poetically about how much better this thing looks, and even emphasizing how he has a better range and articulation. Which, if you think about it, kind of begs an important question. Why did they even bother making a new mold for 86? Clearly the Earthrise figure is superior, it was just a waste of budget to not reuse an already perfect mold. We'll begin our descent with the accessories. Earthrise Ironhide comes equipped with this admittedly small pistol, especially compared to the behemoth he was rocking in Siege, but I actually vibe with this one for a very specific reason. It's based directly on the blaster mounted to the front of his battle station on the original G1 toy. That round disc and tapered barrel make it unmistakable, and I love how they've updated it for this new handheld look. The sculpted detail is nice, it's mostly just structural, but it's done in a way that feels like part of the design, and the gunmetal paint on the end ties the whole thing together. Would I have preferred a bigger gun? Sure, but as a tribute to his original toy and as an accessory on its own merits, I do really like this thing. The same, unfortunately, cannot be said for the shield. This is where things start to fall apart, because yeah, as you can probably tell, that is literally the entirety of his van mode roof as a separate piece. Look, we'll get to the real issues with this thing when we talk about transformation, but the short version is that I don't inherently hate parts forming if they can find a way to justify it, and one of the best ways to do that is if they find something useful they can do with it in robot mode. Animated in particular does this a lot, and it's usually great. Yeah, Blair's hood mostly comes off just to clean up the robot mode, but it really does look like a proper shield, the chainsaw blade gimmick is sick, and honestly my guy could use the accessory given it's literally his only one. On the flip side, Ironhide's clumsy attempt at a shield mode is, well, It's bad. It doesn't look like a shield at all, it's just a big plastic slab with the world's most fragile bayonet at the end. And getting him to hold it well is a challenge. Putting it in his hand looks stupid, so your next instinct would be to plug it into his arm, but it's so graceless. He still looks bad with it, and posing him becomes so clumsy and awkward, in large part because these spikes on the end have a really bad habit of catching on his shoulder. If you want, you can flip it around and pull this tab to reveal a 4-barrel blaster, but that looks even worse, and frankly just reminds me that this one shield has such a high part count that they probably could have just used that budget to integrate the roof into his robot mode instead. I don't know, man, I guess it's not worth getting so tilted that they gave us more accessories, but when it's this bad, I can't help but wish they just hadn't bothered. Again, we'll get into the actual issues with this thing during transformation, but needless to say, I am not a fan. In comparison, the accessories SS86 Ironhide comes with are delightfully basic. You get these twin pistols, which again are probably a little smaller than I'd prefer, but like with Earthrise, they're also a throwback to G1. A lot of the toys Takara designed that'd later be used for Transformers never came with guns, so Sunbow wound up making this generic Autobot laser pistol they could give to any Autobots without a weapon of their own. And even though Ironhide's toy did come with weapons, for some reason he wound up also using this pistol anyways. But while it's a pretty prevalent part of the G1 cartoon, it really hasn't made many appearances in toy form. A handful of Masterpiece figures have it, of course, but the first time it showed up in a mainline series was literally only 2 years before this thing released, with a hard-to-find weapons pack nobody owned that was clearly meant to scale with Bumblebee and no one else. This is the first mainline version of this pistol made with wider use across multiple toys in mind, and it rocks! Like with the Earthrise gun, a lot of the structural design choices work well to add some additional texture, and it's amazing just how much the shaping matches the original animation model. I also appreciate that they painted it in this metallic silver paint. It would have been so easy to just cast it in the same gray as the legs, sorta like they did with the Gen Selects version, but they went the extra mile and it worked so much better because of that. I also love that he comes with 2 of them, in part because his moldmate Ratchet dual-wielded them in the movie, but also so you can give one to a friend. I like these a lot. There's some great history behind them, and they work really well at what they're trying to be. Which is still more than you can say for the Shield. And speaking of the Shield, regrettably, I think it's time to finally talk about the transformations. Oh god. If things were starting to fall apart with Earthrise's accessories, they've fully collapsed with the transformation. I'm trying to think of a nice way to put this. Embarrassing. What's frustrating is how much of it is actually clever, but it's really held back in some very dumb ways that make the entire experience worse. Like, the way the entire torso rotates diagonally to form the front of the van is genius. I love the way the legs literally explode outwards and wrap around the rest of the body. The way the arms swing back and lock in place is super satisfying. There's good stuff here. But this is also where we need to talk about the full history of this figure. Before Earthrise, there was Siege, another chapter of the War for Cybertron trilogy defined by its spacey sci-fi Cybertronian modes. And I'm sure it'll be a shock to no one that, yeah, Earthrise Ironhide is just a retool of his Siege counterpart, basically just replacing most of the visible Cybertronian kibble with Earth van mode components. And on top of that, he wasn't released as a standalone figure. Instead, he was only released as part of an Amazon exclusive 2-pack with Prowl, and you can kinda tell they shared a budget. For starters, a lot of the transformation bits feel cheap and flimsy, especially the feet and the panels and the legs. But even worse is the reality that ultimately, the Siege van mode was obviously never meant to work as an Earth van. So when they tried to retool it for Earthrise, they realized very quickly that a lot of the clever design choices they made to make it work for Siege suddenly wound up sabotaging their attempts to update it for Earthrise. For example, the feet don't have anywhere to go, the shoulders stick so far out that the rest of the van kinda just has to work around them, and most egregiously of all, the shield. Siege Ironhide did not have to worry about his arms being visible in van mode. They're on Cybertron, it's not meant for disguise, it's a made-up sci-fi car, and the roof being made out of 2 slabs of arms worked fine. But for Earthrise, that absolutely wasn't gonna cut it. They needed to find some way to cover it up in vehicle mode without having to overhaul the transformation. And so, their solution was to literally just cover it up with an extra piece. The shield just slinks on top, pegging into these 4 ports, and then using these side panels to cover up the bicep and torso gaps with windows. This technique is usually called parts forming, and it's an extremely controversial practice with Transformers fans. The main argument against it is that, at its core, a Transformers toy is supposed to be a sort of shape-shifting puzzle. The fun is in seeing how everything collapses down and rearranges to change these toys from a robot action figure into a believable model vehicle. But by requiring you to disassemble and reassemble different pieces in order to make that process work, you're cheapening the experience in a way that can come across as lazy. The toy equivalent of using a cheat code to bypass a puzzle in a video game. What could have been a really clever and engaging way of having pieces shift around to look completely different instead relies on slapping wholesale chunks onto the end result just to make it work. Personally, I have a slightly more nuanced take about parts forming. We've already talked about the clever ways Animated uses it, but I feel like there are other instances where it genuinely can be a good thing. When it's a built-in gimmick, like the WFC weaponizers, it works just fine, because the disassembly and reassembly is the entire point. They're going into it knowing that's how it's going to work, so the focus becomes much more on making it fun rather than treating it as a necessary evil sort of compromise. But even within that compromise, I think there really are examples where, if not ideal, it's still acceptable because you can recognize it as the best of a lot of bad options. A lot of these figures are based on existing designs made for TV first, meaning they weren't made with the practicality of transformation in mind. Sometimes, in order to make a figure look accurate, or even just to make it look good, parts forming may be the only option that doesn't sabotage the rest of the transformation, inflate the budget, or make the figure look worse. Someday, we're going to talk about the Earthrise Cliffjumper mold, and all hell is going to break loose. The problem is that the shield doesn't meet any of those conditions. We've already covered how poorly it works as an accessory. It clearly wasn't an intentional gimmick built into the figure from the start, and truthfully, there were absolutely other options to make the transformation work without needing to do any of this. The inside of the legs could have been bulked out with part of the roof in a way that'd be pretty unobtrusive, an extra hinge piece could have been put on these side flaps to cover up the shoulders, windows, and this middle part of the roof, and the front part of the roof and front windows could have been separate pieces attached to the windshield that fold into his chest for robot mode. The shield is made up of 7 separate pieces across 3 different plastic types and uses 2 flathead pins, 2 regular pins, and 2 screws. The alternative they could have done wouldn't have required them to retool any existing siege pieces that hadn't already been retooled, only introduces 5 new molds, and would require at most 5 pins, and that's assuming they didn't want any of them to be held in by friction. And I know this because Studio Series 86 Ironhide does almost all of these. To be clear, it's not a perfect transformation by any means. The clearances on this thing are tight, meaning there are a lot of areas where it gets super hard to move everything into position, and it's annoyingly fiddly. Getting all these panels and pieces properly lined up and tabbed in is a nightmare even if you know what you're doing, and it's oddly strict about the order you do stuff in. You gotta rotate the torso and swing the arms back before you work on the legs, you have to tab the legs together before you wrap these panels around the arms, and you don't want to unfold the feet or move the windshield into position until the legs are fully taken care of. And to make matters worse, you see these hooks on the roof panels? You see these notches in the front windows they're supposed to lock into? You see how they're both made of clear plastic? The translucent stuff is notoriously brittle, these hooks are way tighter than they needed to be. Are you starting to see why so many people cracked theirs somewhere? Even mine is starting to get visibly stressed, and I've only done that transformation a handful of times, mostly for this video. So yeah, the transformation here is far from perfect, but when your competition is this, there's really no competition at all, because for all my gripes with clearances or lining things up, the design is so much more clever and actually integrates the entire alt mode into the robot mode. No roof here, instead it does exactly what I said they could have done with Earthrise. The front third of the roof and the side windows fold neatly into the chest in robot mode. The middle chunk of the roof is made from an extra set of flaps attached to the leg panels. The back half is the only area where things are any different. Instead of rounding out the inner legs, they instead chose to have part of the roof be made out of the inner arms, letting them be exposed like they were on the Siege figure. And the back chunk is made out of the feet, properly integrating them into the rest of the transformation. What really gets me is how, aside from these changes, it's pretty dang similar to Earthrise Ironhide's transformation. The same sort of torso rotation, tabbing into the bumper on the back, the same trick of having the arms fold backwards, even these panels unfolding from the sides of the legs. It's such a good example of the designers learning from the mistakes of their previous attempts and using the larger budget to fix those issues. It also just makes the Earthrise figure look so much worse in comparison, like clearly they could have done this last time and just didn't. Again, the parts necessary to make these changes were pieces they'd already had to retool anyways. man, even the weapon storage is better. With Earthrise, you can either tab it into the underside of the roof or plug it in on top. With SS86, you can either plug them into the front to make it look like he's going on the offensive, or for a more stealthy option, you can plug them into the undercarriage to make them look like exhaust pipes. Are you kidding me? That's genius! Look, I don't want to take away from all the groundwork the Earthrise figure laid in order to make SS86 as good as it is, and I don't want to ignore all the glaring issues in the 86 figure's transformation, but doing them side by side, it's not even a contest. In fact, it's closer to a redemption, like the designers directly recognizing the backlash Earthrise got and responding to it. And the same can be said about the van modes too. You know what the worst part is? The parts of Earthrise Ironhide's van mode that actually are a van are so good. I love that they took the basic G1 van design and, like with the robot mode, put so much more style and personality into it. I love how much bulkier and more aggressive the front bumper and grille look compared to the cartoon, especially painted black like that. The windows are a weird case because originally I thought this hard cutoff from clear plastic to solid red looked terrible, but it turns out this is actually a thing on the original toy, and even sometimes on real-world vans. The extra sculpted lines to indicate doors and separate panels look phenomenal, the shaping is genuinely quite a treat, and the paintwork is fantastic. They actually bothered to paint the door handles and windshield wipers, and the yellow stripe looks great cutting through the red like a dagger. It modernizes the van mode in a way that feels very real and lets Ironhide's character bleed through. In like 3 different shades of blood. Yeah, the color consistency is still a problem in van mode, I'm afraid. More so now because the windows are also clear plastic painted with a slightly too light shade of red. And that's some of the least of this thing's problems. You know how the roof is a solid separate piece? You know how it's made just to fit on top of the actual alt mode? Yeah, it can't even do that well. For some reason it curves up near the back, leaving this weird gap where it's supposed to rest. And that gray hinge in the front sticks out like a sore thumb. Like they couldn't have just added that one piece to one of the 3 red mold sprues, and we're still the wheels. Somehow this is one of the only parts of the van mode to have not been retooled, and it looks bad. Those are so obviously just Cybertronian wheels. Did they really think this would pass for an Earth mode? They're super rattly too, as if the lack of new tooling wasn't enough to make them feel cheap. And speaking of cheap, shoulders. The shoulders were an important part of the original Siege alt mode, but I guess they just stuck out too far to cover up, so they just didn't bother, meaning now there's just this garish black square breaking up the middle of the van mode. It's so rough, dude. Like, this would be really funny if it wasn't actively wrecking the van mode I want so badly to like. I guess on the plus side, that is kind of the worst of it. Super obtrusive, and that's on top of all the other annoying flaws elsewhere, but this is still salvageable. There's nothing too egregious here. I can work with this. It's fine. Why, yes! That is the entirety of his untransformed feet sticking out of the back. How could you tell? I take back what I said earlier. It is really funny. I'm just astounded at this point. The shoulders I kind of get. They stick out past the curve of the van, enough to make covering them up impossible, but you have to keep them black for robot mode. It's an unwinnable situation. But come on! They couldn't do anything to fix this? Couldn't even just, like, give him new feet that at least slightly look like the back of a van mode? They stick out so far past where the van is implied to end too. It's so ridiculous. Like, again, these are carryovers from Siege, and they looked great there. The boxy shape fit the rest of the alt mode, the greebling worked amazingly, and these booster details inside made the fact that they were fully hollow feel a little more intentional. But unless your name's Emmett Brown, I don't think they work quite so well on a normal Earth van. I want to like this thing, man. I want to be able to go, yeah, SS86 is the better transformation, but Earthrise absolutely clears in terms of looks, and then the van mode barges in and kicks the door down with his massive obtrusive stompers. This is, and I mean this with no exaggeration, one of the single most scuffed alt modes of any modern Transformers figure. It's not cohesive, it only half looks good, they couldn't even make it look like the thing it's supposed to be. How in the hell did we get here? And like with literally everything else, SS86 Ironhide's van mode trades style and personality for consistency and cohesion. It is, put simply, a red loaf with windows and wheels. That's kind of all there is to this thing. The colors are mostly consistent. Again, there's a bit of mismatch with the red paint on clear blue plastic, but still a lot less egregious than with Earthrise. And it actually looks like a proper van. No weird black squares, no Cybertronian wheels, and certainly no feet sticking out the back. And yet, it's so boring. They've literally sanded all the edges off. Like, seriously, there's not a single sharp corner on this thing, and it makes him look a whole lot less tough and intimidating than Earthrise. And some of that is just inherent to the design. It's not this toy's fault Bob Budiansky gave this personality to a character with this all default mode, but I feel like Earthrise proves that there are at least some small ways you can make them fit at least a little better together. They've also scaled way down on detail too. No paint on the handles, less sculpting on the bumper and grille, and they didn't even add the yellow stripe. They bothered to sculpt in the place where it would go, but I guess they used up all the paint budget on the clear pieces? It's almost as if those should have been solid red plastic with painted windows to begin with to avoid breakage and use slightly less paint. Overall though, nitpicks aside, this thing does look really solid, especially in comparison to Earthrise. Oh my god, it's not even a competition. For a size comparison, here both vans are next to Tahu Mata, Marvel Legends Death's Head, Earthrise Optimus, Netflix Bumblebee, Earthrise Wheeljack, Animated Blur, Legacy Gears, Earthrise Sunstreaker, and Marvel Legends Extremis Iron Man. What's really interesting about putting these two side by side is that usually Studio Series 86 is a size creep problem. Figures like Optimus, Megatron, and Ultra Magnus are all significantly bigger than their generation's counterparts, and can kind of feel a bit too big to scale properly with a broader generation scale display. Ironhide, on the other hand, has the exact opposite problem, at least in van mode, being shorter in all three directions and kind of feeling too small compared to other generation stuff. It's not super obvious, there's always a little bit of footsing with scale and Transformers, but putting them side by side does make it a bit more apparent. This, of course, leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. Like I said earlier, Earthrise Ironhide was part of an Amazon exclusive 2-pack with Prowl, which retailed for $39.99. And honestly, I think it's this that's caused so many of the problems this figure has. Earthrise had a weird problem with just retooling Siege figures for any reappearing characters instead of making bespoke new molds, and on top of that, it's so clear that Ironhide in particular was never planned to get that retooling treatment. If they had, his Siege figure would probably resemble his usual van design a whole lot more. It's pretty obvious to me that the Fascism website wanted some sort of store exclusive, so they scrambled to make something using a mold they already had based on a character they knew would sell. And to make matters worse, this was right when the pandemic was getting huge, meaning plastic shortages were rising and so were the prices. Technically, if we're splitting the cost of the two figures evenly, Ironhide was working with a Deluxe Class budget, the exact same as his original Siege figure despite having a much higher part count and a lot more paint apps. To be blunt, they stretched themselves thin, and given the end result, I kind of would have preferred to pay Voyager price for this thing if it meant they'd had the budget to really do it properly. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly the trade-off Studio Series Ironhide made. Retailing for $33.99, this thing takes full advantage of the Voyager class budget. He does the old reliable trick of being a class down in size, but using the budget and price of the next class up to become more complex. It's a trick SS86 in particular does a lot, and I really do think it pays off here. Yeah, there are some areas where I wish they'd allocated the budget differently, but in terms of value for what they're charging, I 100% think this is the better deal. Of course, it took me over 3 years to finally make this stupid video, so now both of these figures are long out of stock at any retailer. So how do they compare on the aftermarket? eBay. You can usually find Earthrise Ironhide for somewhere in the $30 to $40 range, but if you're patient, it does occasionally pop up for closer to $25. That honestly isn't too bad given the exclusivity of this thing, especially in comparison to what Prowl goes for nowadays, oh my god. In comparison, despite being much more readily available at mass retail during its release window, SS86 Ironhide generally goes for between $50 and $75, which, to be clear, yeah, the figure is better, but that still seems so not worth it at that price, especially the closer you get to $75. $45 is probably the absolute max you'd want to spend on it, and if you can find it for cheaper, absolutely do that instead. With aftermarket prices in mind, things definitely get a bit more complicated. If you come out of this video going, yeah, I like Earthrise better, go for it. Find the cheapest complete listing and have fun. If you vibe more with Studio Series though, I definitely recommend holding off and waiting to see if someone else lists it for less. Definitely don't go over like 50. The quality of this figure makes it a better value than Earthrise, especially at retail price, but not that much better. And with all that in mind, I want to go back to those questions I asked at the start of the video. Why are these lines so different, and which one is better? You know what the weird thing is? If Earthrise Ironhide had just been a slightly better toy, we might not have all the unique molds that we do in Studio Series 86. Looking back, it's kind of funny how quickly the line just kind of ran out of main characters to make toys of. Within a year, pretty much the entirety of the film's main cast, and even some of its smaller guest roles, had all been given toys either in SS86 or Kingdom. But clearly the line was far too successful to end, so Hasbro took a gamble. Redo characters generations had already done, regardless of how small their appearance in the film, with the new objective of being more screen accurate. They started by taking baby steps, re-releasing Earthrise Starscream with a ton of movie-specific accessories to justify his inclusion in the line. Then came Cliffjumper, a more toon-accurate deco of the existing Earthrise mold. This was their ticket to keep the line alive, and given where we are now, I think it's safe to say that it worked, giving them the green light to start doing this for every character, even the ones that only appeared in their death scene. And if you've got blanket permission to completely redo any Generations toy in need of an update, what figure needs it more badly than Earthrise Ironhide? It makes me wonder, if this figure had just been good from the start, if they hadn't needed to completely redesign it from the ground up just so people wouldn't hate it, where would we be now? Starscream and Cliffjumper both have issues, but they were still good enough to reuse those existing molds. But SS86 Ironhide was born out of necessity because Earthrise Ironhide was truly too terrible to release again. And it was only once the floodgates were open that they started remaking any figure they considered to be in need of an update. Ultra Magnus, Bumblebee, Optimus, Springer, Megatron, and so many more. But there was a catch. Most of the modern Generations toys of these characters were good, but they weren't trying to perfectly recreate the cartoon designs. The goal of Generations since its inception has always been to bring the characters into the modern day, reworking proportions and adding detail to existing designs to make them feel all the more real, and they often looked pretty different because of that. But that's the entire point of Studio Series. The line exists entirely to finally give fans accurate, high-quality toys of these characters as they appeared in the film. If they were remaking these toys from the ground up, instead of just repainting existing molds, they were basically obligated to do it this way. Those first waves were the way they were because, like we discussed, it's clear they were carryovers from Generations. But by this point, SS86 had fully cemented itself as a proper sub-theme within Studio Series, and with it came the expectations of any other Studio Series figure. These things are so different because they have to be. Yes, on paper, they're designed to replace our Generations figures, but they can only do that to a point without losing sight of what the theme markets itself as. And I think that's the tragedy of it. They're different from Generations because they aren't Generations. I've talked a lot about how I prefer the stylized, greebled look, but the truth is, I'm not blanketly opposed to the smoother screen accuracy of SS86. In fact, there are times when I love it. I adore the Transformers animated toy line in large part because of how accurate it is. I think the style is perfect for the more cartoony look of Loki's. Hell, if that Magic Square Optimus wasn't so expensive, I'd have caved and picked it up a long time ago. If it existed in a vacuum, I'd have no problem with how smooth and screen accurate SS86 figures are. I'd still prefer the intricate look of stuff like Generations more, but I wouldn't be going on about it this much. But it doesn't exist in a vacuum, does it? Both Hasbro and the fans treat them like they're still perfect stand-ins for proper modern Generations figures. The reality is that if you want a good mainline Ironhide, this is it. It may have strayed away from compatibility with Generations in terms of design philosophy, but the designers seem perfectly content to consider a better Generations Ironhide figure checked off the list now because of this. And it keeps spreading. SS86 keeps fixing and updating flawed Generations figures, promising a better replacement for the one you already have. But with every update, it fits in less and less with the aesthetic, feels less and less like a living, moving giant machine. But fans still treat it like these are perfectly compatible replacements. And maybe they are. Maybe all this talk of art style is just me being nitpicky. But maybe, just maybe, they don't fit after all. Which, finally, brings us to the big important question. Which one is better? 86, obviously. Like, come on, obviously SS86 is the better figure. Even if I don't like it as much, it's still just objectively the better toy. More complete transformation, way more cohesive alt mode, visibly higher QC and budget. Like I keep saying, it's not even a competition. But man, I still like the Earthrise one more. I look at this thing and I see Ironhide. I see the tough, battle-hardened soldier we all love. And when I look at 86 Ironhide, it's just got no sauce, dude. It's just some guy. I just wish there was a way to get rid of the Earthrise figure's biggest issues, at least enough to where its personality alone could put it on top. Now wait a minute. Third-party upgrade kits have been a thing in the Transformers community for years. The basic idea is that even without the license or permission from Hasbro, other companies will make replacement or additional pieces you can use to improve existing figures. Dubious legality for sure, but it means we can absolutely take steps to fix Earthrise Ironhide. Starting small, there are plenty of kits online for replacement wheels that actually look like they belong on an Earth van. Mine are 3D printed, which I only found out when I took them out to film this video and 2 of the pegs snapped along the layer lines. It sucks, but at least pretty replaceable, and if nothing nothing else, they do look way better than the Cybertronian wheels. And somehow they're way less rattly than the originals? Not really sure how that happened, but I am not complaining. Next, it's time we did something about the shield. Like I said earlier, I think parts forming is acceptable if it serves a purpose, and it just so happens that there's a precedent for Ironhide toys doing something with the top of their van modes. This kit turns it into the battle station from his G1 toy, fully decked out with treads and both weapons from that original figure. Yeah, to some extent it's still just an awkward, useless accessory, and ironically the battle station itself requires parts forming, but it at least does enough for me to trick my brain into being fine with the parts forming because, ooh, but it's an homage, now it's no different from the toy-inspired Ultra Magnus figures with parts forming armor. But of course, the real game changer here is what you can do for the feet. There are a ton of upgrade kits out there that replace these boxy Cybertronian disasters with parts that actually transform, and oh my god, this changes everything. Not only does it improve the transformation by adding extra steps, but in van mode? Oh dude, oh holy hell, it's beautiful. It actually looks like a van now! The sculpt work, the silhouette, this alone does so much to bring up the quality of the whole figure, and combining it with the others? Incredible! Look, do these kits make the figure perfect? Absolutely not. There's still plenty to critique, like the color matching or the visible shoulders, but these kits clear up all the biggest issues I have enough that I can actually appreciate that ever-important style and personality I keep talking about to the point of truly liking the figure more than SS86. Now, the elephant in the room is that you really shouldn't have to do this just in order for the figure to kind of be on the same level as the new one. But the crazy thing is that, depending on where you get them, these kits can total to about $20 or $30. Basically, if you get this figure and all 3 upgrades, you're really only spending about the same as you would if you got SS86 Ironhide. Thank you, Aftermarket, for your bafflingly stupid and cartoonishly greedy practices. So at that point, it really comes down to one thing. Which one do you like more? I've whined a lot about how the smooth G1 animation style doesn't work as well in toy form, or how it doesn't fit in with other generations figures, but the reality is that I'm very biased and very nitpicky. I think both of these toys, yes, both of them, are fantastic options depending on what you want out of your Transformers. If you want something more G1 inspired, Studio Series 86 Ironhide is the perfect figure and you should absolutely get it. But for me, it's Earthrise all the way. That is, until Generations actually starts giving us original designs again and does an Ironhide that turns into a pickup truck. Now that will be the real best Ironhide.